Joining us now is Ari Zoldan, CEO of Quantum Networks. Ari, great to have you back on the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Michelle.
Ari, as we reported earlier, Uber has that astronomical valuation of $40 billion. There's speculation that the funding and the stock evaluation is all set up for an IPO, initial public offering, sometime in 2015. How likely is that?
I think it's pretty likely. If it's not going to happen in 2015, it's probably going to happen early 2016. There's a lot of buzz on the street about it, especially with this whole sharing economy that people are talking about. So it's a hot buzzword right now.
Look, Uber is generating buzz, both positive and negative. We just detailed a list of its problems that it has around the world. And it has these pending regulations, pending lawsuits, complaints from customers to taxi drivers to city officials. Can it file for an IPO until all of these issues are sorted?
I think they can, because I don't think they're ever going to be completely sorted out. They definitely do have an uphill battle with regulatory people and policy people, and now they're international. They're outside in over about 55 countries. So there are a lot of issues out there, but I think that they're going to start the process of going via the IPO. And I think as a process takes a life of itself, they're going to work through probably most of these issues.
Well, how can these issues be worked through? Because what you have is complaints from taxi drivers saying, hey, we've got to abide by all of these rules and regulations and buy licenses. We had protests from Chinese taxi drivers just this week, and they're seen everywhere in the world, practically. And Uber is letting its drivers go about their business without having to comply with these restrictions. So the question is, should city officials ban these sharing economy type of technologies and type of companies, or should they impose regulations on them, or should they lift the regulations and restrictions off the other companies, like the conventional taxis? Sure.
I think it's a very fair question. And I see outside, right outside the taxi drivers, how difficult not only how difficult that they're working out there, but the paperwork involved for them and the licensing and the regulations for them to actually just get in the car and start making money is very, very difficult. And then you have Uber, like you said, through the back door, and they're completely free from any of these regulatory issues. So they do have an uphill battle, and I do think, to answer your question, Michelle, is having some sort of unified standard that applies to all transportation vehicles, I think, is the answer.
So what is the likely path that's going to happen, in your opinion? And I'm not asking you to look into your, crystal ball here, but what do you recommend? Should officials drop the regulations for the conventional forms, or should they add regulations to these more unconventional technology-based sharing economy type of companies, and not just Uber, companies like Airbnb as well?
Adding regulations, I think, is the absolute wrong approach to take, and I think it's going to, at the end of the day, it's going to harm the consumer. I think creating bodies of regulations and at least standards that a lot of these companies, both public and private, can adhere to, but creating at least a very even playing field where everybody can really work off of the same platform.
But you're saying take away the regulations from the other companies?
I think they should strip down a little bit, so where everyone is equal and everybody has a good chance.
What does that mean for the consumer? How do I know, for example, moving away from Uber to Airbnb, when you check into a hotel, there are certain health standards that you can expect. Hotel companies need to adhere to certain standards of cleanliness, to certain fire codes, to things that make the consumer have a better and safer experience. Sure. Along comes Airbnb, and anybody can rent out an apartment without any oversight. So how is this better for the consumer if all the regulations are stripped away?
Well, I think consumers, if they're getting into the game of sharing economy and they are getting good prices, something has to give. So yeah, they're not going to walk into someone's apartment and they're not going to have the air regulated and the sheets made. And I think that in terms of managing your expectation, you're getting a great deal, so you're not going to get everything. If you want that kind of service, you could check yourself into a hotel.
How is this going to impact those conventional businesses?
I think it's going to hurt them. I mean, there's just, we're living in this surplus economy right now where these technology companies, these small technology companies are going after industries, and they're completely disrupting them. So, for instance, we talked about the transportation sector. That's been around for hundreds of years, and a small tech company goes ahead and creates an agnostic platform to be able to shake up the industry. The same thing with Airbnb for the hotel industry. So I think the challenge over the next couple of years is figuring out how to be able to integrate the older existing businesses with the new tech companies.
And who does that challenge fall upon? Is it governments?
It's a very good question. I think a lot of those questions right now are in front of Congress in terms of regulation. I think the jury is still out on that.
Well, Airbnb is valued at about $13 billion. Also talk of a potential IPO for them. But the question is, can any of these companies really go public where they are then subject to public standards of like the Securities and Exchange Commission when all of the intricacies and regulations and frameworks have not been ironed out?
I think so. I mean, look, Facebook, all these tech companies had these issues early on. There are privacy issues, cybersecurity issues. But as they start taking that journey down that road, I think a lot of those issues do get flushed out and get cleaned up.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. Ari Zoldan, CEO of Quantum Networks.